You mean everything to me because I know you mean everything to Christ. And Christ means everything to me.
I called on the Lord. I said, that Father, this is real. Will you watch over them? Will you raise them up to be strong? I'm just a man with flesh. This is what you called for in your scriptures. You said they wore studs and fringes, they got it on. You said they follow the Lord, they doing it. You said under your house shine, they ought to love one another. And they doing it.
We're in front of the Israeli School, Universal Practical Knowledge, the Philadelphia Division, here at 3226 Cheltenham Avenue in Philadelphia. We're standing in front of the school right now, getting a description of the 12 tribe sign that's been painted by one of the brothers that was in the school: Judah, Benjamin, Levi, Simeon, Zebulun, Ephraim, Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, Naphtali, Asher, Issachar. Those are the 12 tribes of Israel.
Shalom. Shalom. You've been waiting for this day, so this day has finally come. A lot of you have been wondering where this knowledge that you've been hearing is coming from, and the powerful truth that you've been hearing, how this was established. Well, we finally were able to arrange for the priests to come down from New York and spend some time with us. And I'd like to introduce them if I can. These are some great brothers. We're very glad to have them with us. We want to make them feel as warm as possible because this is their work and the extension of their work and what they've laid down some time ago. I'd like to introduce, first of all, priest and Sixth Shield General, 4th in command in the nation of Israel, Lahab. I'd like to salute this brother. Macho. Barak. Yeshabiam, which means sit. And I'm going to turn it over now to Priest General Lahab.
Water, brother. I'd like to say this, starting off, we're very impressed at your school here, and we're very impressed to see that the brothers and sisters in Philadelphia think enough of the Most High and the Bible and the truth and your nationality to be a part of this, because most of the brothers and sisters are running from the truth.
Hey, Shalom, Israel. Yahweh Shem Yahshua Barakatham to the brothers. Yahweh Shemal Atham Bashem Yahshua to the sisters. Okay, give me 1 second just to make sure my sound's good. All right, Salakia, we were running a little late, had some technical difficulties. All right, if you're in the chat, just put a 1 in the chat if you can hear my sound okay. Okay, put a 1 in the chat if you can hear my sound. Okay, put a 1 in in the chat if you can hear my sound. Okay, it sounds like we good. All right, so again, Shalom, Yahbashim Shabbat Thumb to the brothers. Yahweh Shemal Thumb Bashim and Shadi the sisters. And Priest and Officer Shari Wan and the Commanding General Yohana. And we are the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, started at a 1 West, 125th Street, Harlem, New York. Okay. If you're with the class, make sure you hit that like button. All right, like, share, subscribe. All right, make sure you like, share, subscribe. And let's get this truth out to our people. All right. Let's get this truth out to our people. Okay, so we got another Monday night history class. All right, the water for tuning in. Monday night history class. We got an interesting topic tonight. And I'm gonna give some history tonight from the Canadian side. Okay, I'm in Canada, and one of the things that I want to make very clear, or maybe isn't spoken about enough, but when you read in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, all right, the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 1, you read about a covenant that was made with the children of Israel, between the children of Israel and the Most High. Okay, that covenant said that if we would obey the Most High, that we would be blessed. We would be blessed, we would be above all nations on the face of the earth. And if we disobeyed that covenant, then we would be at the bottom. Okay, we would be at the bottom, and we would be below all nations on the face of the earth. And what's important about that is one of the most important things that Blacks, Hispanics, and Indigenous people need to know when they read this Bible is who they are, who their nationality is, where they descend from, who they come from. Because that is something that has been absolutely stripped from Blacks, Hispanics, and Indigenous people. Our culture, our identity, we have no knowledge of self, we don't know who we are. These things have been stripped from us all throughout the earth. You see the majority of us in North and South Central America, but we have also been scattered throughout the whole earth. And wherever we go on this earth, these curses and these blessings follow us. This covenant doesn't matter where you are on earth. If you are Black, Hispanic, or Indigenous, if you are the children of Israel, okay, the people who identify as being Black, Hispanic, Indigenous, you are the children of God, and those covenants follow you no matter where you are on this earth. You understand? And inside of Canada, if you are Black, Hispanic, or Indigenous, a lot of the crimes, a lot of the things that we go through is almost hidden. It doesn't get spoken about unless, you damn near have to force the government's hand to figure out and find out what atrocities are being done to us as the people of God. What hell that we go through as the people of God. What hell we go through under the Canadian government, the American government, over in Haiti, Jamaica, Martinique, you understand, St. Vincent, all the Caribbean islands, Trinidad and Tobago, going all the way down into South America, over into Brazil, Belize, Guatemala, Panama, Venezuela. These curses follow us everywhere that we go. And a specific curse that we're going to get into today, let me see if I pull it up really quick, is something that has followed us all throughout this earth. In the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, Deuteronomy 28 and verse, let me see here. Slovakia. We go to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, and let's start at verse 15. It says, but it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Okay? If we did not listen to the voice of the Lord thy God, which we did not do, blacks, Hispanics, and indigenous people, we did not do that. And because of that, there was a laundry list of curses that were spoken about that would happen to us in the book of Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. Verse 16, it says, cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field. And something that blacks, Hispanics, and indigenous need to understand is that we are absolutely cursed inside of the cities that we live in today. We live in the ghettos, barrios, and reservations. We make up the top statistic of every hellish condition that you can think of. We fill up the prison systems. We fill up the jailhouses. We fill up the number one being, unemployed or last hired, first fired. You know what I mean? The different things they do to terrorize us in these streets. We are number one in all of them. And if you jump down to, let me see the verse I was looking for. Where it says, there shall be no might in thy hand. Slovakia. Deuteronomy 28 and verse 32. Okay. Slacking my computer acting up a little bit. So it says in Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 32, it says, if we jump up to verse 31, says, thine ox shall be slain before thine eyes. And that is something that happened to us. You see in North and South Central America, they slaughtered all the buffalo. They slaughtered all the buffalo, and they left no food for the indigenous people on this land. We were left here to starve. That was a war tactic that our oppressor used on us to destroy us. It says, thou shalt not eat thereof, which is exactly what we weren't able to do. We starved. We died of starvation. We died of sickness. We died of so many different things. The Europeans, when they came over here, they committed a mass genocide onto us. It says, thine ass shall be violently taken away from before thy face, and shall not be restored to thee. Thy sheep shall be given unto thine enemies, and thou shalt have none to rescue them. And this is the verse I wanted to get to. Verse 32, it says, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people. Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people. Which is such a sad thing to truly digest. You understand? That's what the book of Revelation says. It says that this word, some of these sayings are hard to digest. Because imagine being a people where your sons and your daughters are given unto another people. That is a very sad thing to happen. That is a very traumatic experience to go through. And that's exactly what Blacks, Hispanics, and indigenous people went through. Thy sons and thy daughters have literally been given unto another people. And we're going to get into that. We're going to look up the history of the Canadian government literally taking the children of God away from their parents, all the way up until this day in 2025. They did it when they first came over here, and they committed a mass genocide on our people, and they continue to do it to this day. I'm going to show you the history of what Canada has been doing to the indigenous people here in Canada. It says, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people. Just such a sad and disgusting thing to do to a people. It's such a sad and traumatic thing that our people have had to go through. And it says, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long. Meaning we would be looking for our children. We'd be looking for our babies. And our eyes would fail us. What happens when your eyes fail you means they're unable to find the thing that they're looking for. Meaning Black, Indigenous, and Hispanic parents have been going around looking for their babies, looking for their children. Something that we do till this day. I remember one time driving up to a reserve inside of Canada, and there was this massive sign on the road going towards the Indigenous reservation. And on that sign or that billboard, it said, please stop taking our children. Please stop taking our children. That was it was 2025. That was maybe 3 years ago. Maybe 3 years ago in northern Ontario. That sign said, please stop taking our children. That's such a hellish condition to be in. Where you're pleading with the people of Canada to leave their children alone. I hear so many times, people say, well, you're not a slave today. You're not in hell today. A lot of the things that, Blacks, Hispanics, and Indigenous people cry about happened in the past. No, that sign is up today. That sign is up today saying, please leave our children alone. How many Black, Hispanic, and Indigenous children keep reportedly going missing? All the hundreds of thousands of children going missing inside of 2025. These are things that we still go through till this day. And it says, and fail with longing for them all the day long, meaning we would long for our children. We would be, we would be at the house waiting for the day to see our children. We would be longing. It would be painful. We would be in agony, waiting to see our children again, praying that they would come up, praying that they would show up, praying that the police would find them, praying that somebody would find our babies. This is exactly what we go through. It says, and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand. No might in thine hand, meaning we would have no power to stop people from doing this. We would have no power. And that is exactly what's been taking place inside of Canada. And I'm going to run down some of the history behind the Canadian government stealing Indigenous babies from their parents. All right, let's start off we're going to start off with going through a little history on what the residential school was. And I'm going to leave that verse up because we're going to go over this verse probably a couple times tonight. I'll start off with playing a quick video and then I'll read a little bit in the article. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, this is a video titled Separating Children from Parents. Oh, no, Slovakia. Don't want that one. I want the residential schools. Okay, we're going to start off in the residential schools. I believe this is the one. Because this is, this is one that it's only now starting to become a little more common knowledge. A little more common knowledge that people are starting to realize what Canada has done to Indigenous people. Okay, it said it started in the 1880s and it went on until 1996. 1996, I was well and alive inside of Canada, during that time. And during that time, I had no idea. I couldn't tell you what a native North American Indian looked like. Damn near didn't know they existed while I was living inside of Canada. These residential schools went on from around 1880, or I think that's at 1856, all the way until 1996. 1996. What's that, about 30 years ago? A little under 30 years ago, 1996, the last residential school in Canada closed. Okay, this is explaining some of the things that went on. You had over 100,000 Native Indian children that were brought to residential schools. Some people know them as boarding schools. And on these boarding schools, they were sexually abused, physically abused. They had their culture, their identity beaten out of them, literally inside of these elementary schools, inside of these residential schools where little babies were attending. They were sexually abused in the showers. They were sexually abused in the classrooms, sexually abused in their bedrooms. And these things were all done, which I don't believe it said in this video, under the whole um, Catholic religion, Catholic organization. These atrocities were done to these kids by Catholic priests, Catholic nuns, people who were presenting themselves as the representative of God. You wonder why Native Indians don't want to hear about the Bible today, because a race of people were pretending to be representatives of God. And as they were pretending to be representatives or presenting themselves to be as representatives of God, they were sexually abusing these children, physically abusing these children, beating their culture, their identity, their language, their history out of them inside of these schools. So much so to the point of children being unalived inside of these elementary schools. Imagine having your child taken away from you, being sent to a school for 10 months out of the year, and sometimes not coming back home. Your child is 7 years old, taken from the Canadian government, put in this residential school, and at the end of the 10 months, they do not come home. Not only do they not come home, but the Canadian government doesn't report back to the parents where their child is. They don't report back to their parent that their child died, their child was unalived inside of this residential school. These things went unreported. And these people, these parents, were longing for their children. Just like Deuteronomy 20 and verse 32 says, wondering where their child is. Being told that their child is just, doing a quote unquote summer program, as we would call it today. They're still in the school doing some extracurricular activities. These children were in these schools and they never came back home. Why? Because they were buried in the backyard of a residential school. They were buried in the backyard of the playground, of the school ground. Imagine going to school and seeing a cemetery where your playground is. This is exactly what happened to these children. And these residential schools, the last residential school was closed in 1996. All right, quick shout out to the chat. Shalom. Nawa Yahushua Thamba Shemel Shai. Shout out to Nishad Gabar. All right. What's going on, Trooper? Yabashim Shabakatha. Okay. These children never made it back home. Never made it back home. And at the end of it, it said people are just now inside of Canada starting to learn about these schools. Just now, even though they've been open and going on since the 1800s, people in Canada didn't know a damn thing about these schools. Some of these schools had electric chairs inside of them, where they would abuse these children and discipline them in different ways just for keeping or speaking their language, for keeping their culture. All right. I dropped that video. And I'm going to read a little, see if I can read a quick definition on just what these residential schools were. I'm going to share my screen. This is from the Encyclopedia of Canada. Okay, it says residential schools in Canada. Residential schools were government-sponsored religious schools that were established to assimilate Indigenous children into Euro-Canadian culture. So this is what these schools were designed to do. These residential schools inside of Canada, they were designed. Okay, this is the purpose of them. This is the point of them. They were designed, they were established to assimilate Indigenous children into Euro-Canadian culture. They wanted Native Indians to take on the culture of the people oppressing them. They wanted the Native Indians to take on the culture of the North American Indian. They wanted the Native Indian to get rid of their culture, their identity, because the European man's way of life is better. So many times you hear that saying, that term Native Indian means original savage, the original savage of the land, as to imply that the indigenous people in the land were a savage race of people, which is exactly how today they would love to portray our people. They would love to portray us as savages, portray us as ghetto, portray us as thugs, portray us as gangbangers, portray us as a no-good race of people that need to be civilized. This is exactly what the Canadian government not only said, this is what the Canadian government believed, that the Indigenous child needed to assimilate into Euro-Canadian culture. It says, although the first residential facilities were established in New France, the term usually refers to schools established after 1880. Residential schools were created by Christian churches and the Canadian government. So many times in the ISUPK, you hear us say that Christianity is white supremacy. Why do we say that? Because of what Christianity taught. The Christian church teaches that the white man is the greatest man, the greatest race of people to ever walk this earth. That is what Christianity teaches. That is exactly what these Christian churches taught the Native Indian inside of Canada. It says it right here that the Christian churches and the Canadian government created these residential schools inside of Canada. You want to know the most evil man walking this earth? It's that Catholic Pope, that Christian deacon, the Christian pastor, that Catholic bishop, that Catholic nun, that Christian woman who presents themselves as a representative of God. These are the people that established some of the most evil organizations known to man. Imagine Christianity being the reason for electric chairs inside of elementary schools. not only imagine it, but understand that that is a reality. That is exactly what happened inside of Canada. Those nuns, those nuns walking around with a Christian cross around their neck, they are the ones that were sexually abusing little children inside of residential schools. It says residential schools were created by Christian churches and the Canadian government as an attempt to both educate and convert indigenous youth and to assimilate them into Canadian society. However, the schools disrupted lives and communities, causing long-term problems among indigenous peoples. The last residential school closed in 1996. (1996) was the last residential school. They're still digging up graves till this day inside of Canada, calling them unmarked graves. Unmarked grave is a grave, a cemetery, a grave site where a body was put under the ground, and that grave has no identity of who was buried there. Let me pull up that verse, and I should keep this on the screen down there the whole class. That unmarked grave is where a child was buried. Child was buried in the playground of an elementary school. And in that grave, there was no marking on who was buried under there. What verse 32 says? It says, "Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look, and fail with longing for them all the day long." You thought your child just went to a residential school to learn how to speak English. Your child went to a residential school and was murdered, was unalived, was buried under the ground, and no nun, no Catholic nun, no Catholic priest told you that your child was unalived. They buried your child under the ground and just told you some lie like they're still in some summer program. You see, to this day, they're giving reports inside of Canada of finding, children and bodies being coming up from being frozen in the northern parts of Canada. They have articles and different findings showing that children were running, trying to escape from these residential schools inside of a cold country of Canada. And as these children ran from these schools, as they ran trying to flee the sexual abuse and physical abuse from these Catholic nuns and Catholic priests, they froze to death in the middle of winter inside of Canada. These children never made it home. These are the records and the findings of the things that have been happening to the North American Indians inside of Canada. And the residential school was just one thing that Canadians have done to the Indigenous people inside of Canada. After residential schools, they had something pop up in the 1960s. which people are still just starting to learn about inside of Canada. And it was something called the 60s scoop, the 1960s scoop. We're going to learn a little bit about what's been happening inside of Canada.
Between the 1960s and the 1980s, tens of thousands of Indigenous kids were taken from their families and put into the child welfare system. It's known as the 60s scoop, and its effects are still being felt today. The practice of taking kids out of Indigenous communities goes back as long as Canada has been a country. First, there was the residential school system. The goal there was to assimilate Indigenous kids, and as one bureaucrat said, solve Canada's Indian problem.
Right, and understand that this is a quote. Okay, this is a quote from the Deputy Superintendent of the Department of Indian Affairs. This is a representative of the Canadian government saying that he wants to get rid of the Indian problem. Wants to get rid of the Indian problem. And it's no different than today. You know, you hear things of what they say, things like black fatigue. You know how many times I've heard people inside of Canada say, I'm tired of hearing the Indians complain. I'm tired of hearing the North American Indians cry about, you know, the different crimes that were committed to them inside of Canada. What do they say? That you need to pull your bootstraps up and get your life together. These things all happened in the past. Because you're a headache to the Canadian government. You're a headache to the European man inside of Canada. Let me see if I can let's pull something up really quick. Just a small sidebar. Because understand that, you know, this isn't just how Europeans view Indigenous people inside of Canada. This file might be too big. I'll have to pull it up. I'll pull it up later, maybe at the end of the class, to show how Europeans have always felt about the black man inside of Canada. Let me keep going on with this for now. All right, so this is the Deputy Superintendent of the Department of Indian Affairs. Oh, let me see, do I got it up here? Slovakia, let me, yeah, I have it right here. Let me pause this really quick, okay? Because understand, black man, this isn't just the Indigenous people inside of Canada. Okay, we're gonna get right back to this. Let me share my screen. This is a newspaper article that came out, I think, in 1856. No, 1861. I'm glad I saved this. I should screenshot this page, because you got to go through hundreds of pages to find this. Okay, this is a article. This is a newspaper article from It was called the Maple Leaf newspaper. Okay, in 1856, there was a newspaper company inside of Windsor, Ontario. Okay, it was inside of Windsor, Ontario. And this, let's see, is that showing? Yeah, we got to pull it up. And this article, this was during the time of the Underground Railroad. Where you had such a quote unquote mass migration of blacks fleeing the South, fleeing their slavery inside of America, coming to Canada to try to find refuge. And as they came into Canada and found refuge, quote unquote, found a place to stay inside of Canada, do you know what Canadians did to the slaves that came inside of Canada? Canadians bombed the settlements that black people came to inside of Canada. There's an article that was written the day after Canadians bombed one of the settlements that thousands of blacks were coming to inside of Canada, crossing the Detroit River. They had this small piece called Negro Flitting. It says, a dark cloud hung around the town of Windsor on Monday morning in the shape of about 200 Negroes of all ages and colors and of both sexes, who had just arrived in this blessed land of freedom from Chicago and other parts of Illinois. So what happened? The black man was fleeing the South, fleeing Alabama, fleeing Florida, fleeing Virginia, all those southern states. They were coming up to Chicago, Detroit, the quote-unquote free states inside of America. And as they crossed the river into Canada through this Underground Railroad, they had a newspaper article saying a dark cloud hung around the town of Windsor on Monday morning in the shape of about 200 Negroes of all ages. Why was it a dark cloud surrounding Windsor of Negroes? Because they bombed the blacks that were seeking freedom inside of Canada. They set you on fire. They bombed you. They terrorized you. And they let cities know that you are not welcome here. It says they came from Chicago and other parts of Illinois. 300 more were to arrive last night, and more are to follow, numbering in all over 1,000. They are fugitive slaves with their wives and children who are driven from the states from the fear of being run down, or from the fear of being run down south again. So you were black running from your slave master, and you were in fear of being caught from your slave master. So you kept running, and you crossed the Detroit River, came into Canada. And they said that they saw all these thousands of blacks running into Canada in fear of being run down from south again as a family. 5 in number were a week or two ago. We wish that the southern slave owners whose slaves get to the free states would let them stay there in peace. That's what Canadians said. We wish that the slave masters in the South would leave the slaves alone that are running to the north in peace. Why? It says, they are by no means a desirable class of people, and we don't want them. That is what Canadians said. And it's taught so many times all throughout history, all over, that the Underground Railroad existed, not knowing that the Underground Railroad had, thousands of different destinations. It wasn't just to the north inside of Canada. You had the Underground Railroad going into Mexico. Tons of slaves ran into Mexico fleeing from their slave owners. But if you were a slave coming to Canada thinking you were going to find freedom, when you got here, Canadians terrorized you. Okay, somebody in the chat said, when and where was this bombing? This bombing was in 1861 inside of Windsor, Ontario, Canada. This bombing took place inside of Windsor, Ontario, Canada. And it was a place where a lot of slaves, quote unquote, settled, fleeing from the Underground Railroad. And this was an article written the day after that the citizens of Windsor decided to bomb the slaves that settled here. You can look up this history. This is just an article from the Windsor newspaper inside of 1861. Let me drop that and go back to that other video. Okay, again, this was the general, or the deputy superintendent of the Department of Indian Affairs, who said, I want to get rid of the Indian problem. Understand, black man, Hispanic man, indigenous man, you are always going to be a problem to your oppressor. Always. While you have ICE agents going around deporting Hispanics by the thousands. While you have Donald Trump terrorizing the Venezuelans, the Hispanics, the Mexicans, the Guatemalans, the Panamanians, because we are not a desirable people amongst our oppressor. Keep going on with the video.
Then in the 1960s, provinces started taking large numbers of Indigenous children into care. The term 60 scoop actually came from a BC social worker who reportedly said she felt like she was literally scooping children out of their parents' arms.
So what is the 60 scoop? The 60 scoop is a term used that was started by a woman who said, a social worker who said, there are so many Indigenous children, Indigenous babies being put into the child welfare system that she felt like she was literally scooping up children. That's where the term came from. That she was literally scooping up children because there were so many. So after the Canadian government forces our babies, forces our children into residential schools, there's also something that they start doing, which is so diabolical. It's so diabolical. They put Indigenous people inside of poor living conditions with their different land treaties. Put them on the reservations. And as they did that and created poor living conditions for Indigenous people inside of Canada, they started saying that if you are a family who is impoverished, in poverty, you are not suitable to raise your children. And the Canadian government used poverty as an excuse to take children by the thousands into custody of the government.
Those decisions were often made by non-Indigenous social workers who didn't necessarily understand Indigenous culture or family structures, like the role of extended family in childcare. Social workers often saw challenges, like poverty, as a reason to remove children. Many parents grew up in residential schools and were facing their own trauma. Some of them even asked social services for help. But the jump in the number of Indigenous kids in the child welfare system around this time is staggering. In BC, for example, First Nations children made up less than 1% of all kids in foster care in the early 1950s. A decade later, that number was 34%, and a similar spike happened in other provinces.
So now here's some of the numbers on what this 60s scoop was about. So in the 1950s, you have 1% of foster children in all of Canada making up the Indigenous population. 1% of all foster children. It's a less than 1% of all foster children inside of Canada were Indigenous. Less than 1%. Then in the 1960s, this report says they had 34% of just BC's foster children were Indigenous.
Some governments developed special programs designed to get Indigenous children adopted, like Saskatchewan's AIM program. The AIM program advertised kids on TV and radio and in newspapers. Almost all of the kids who were adopted went to white families in Canada, the United States, and even as far away as New Zealand. Across the country, thousands of Indigenous kids were adopted out. But to this day, the government says it still doesn't know exactly how many.
Now, what did the Canadian government do? The Canadian government started advertising Indigenous children. Can you imagine that? Your child is being advertised on TV, advertised in the newspapers. Your child is an advertisement for European families to adopt you. You like your children are like a car. Your children are a piece of property being advertised so that people can take you from your homes. And it would be, and I'm going to pull up some of the numbers. You would think that, what do Europeans love to say? Oh, that's just a coincidence. It was just a couple children. It wasn't that many children. It wasn't that big a deal. You're overreacting. You're making a bigger deal than what it really is. Let me drop this video. And I'm going to share some of the statistics on the 60s scoop. Where did I put that? Okay, I think it's right here. Let me share my screen. We're going to look at the numbers. We're going to look up some of the numbers on the 60s scoop. Okay, because, and they even went as far as to start programs like a program called the AIM, where it was literally targeted at advertising Indigenous and Métis children. That's what AIM stands for. Advertising Indigenous and Métis children. That was a program started inside of Canada. Let me make this bigger. We're going to read through this. Okay, this is an article called The Child Welfare Policy. At the usage of residential and day schools started to decrease in the 1950s and 60s. So now hold on. Residential schools start to decrease in the 1950s and 1960s. Residential schools are decreasing, and you think now your children are going to be safe. Or maybe Canada just finds another way to start stealing your children. It says, in the 1950s and 60s, the child welfare system started to decrease. The child welfare system became the primary mechanism for colonization and assimilation. Read that again. The child welfare system became the primary mechanism for colonization and assimilation. They weren't just advertising your children to be sold to anybody. They were advertising for your child to be sold or to be given to a European, to be put inside of a European home. It says the 60s scoop is a term that describes a process where Indigenous children were taken away from their families and put into European Canadian homes. Although the result of the Indigenous child welfare policy during this time was assimilatory, the motivation of provincial child service agencies was much less overtly racist than the federal Indian Affairs Department. So this is what the 60s scoop was about. It was about taking Indigenous children and giving them to European Canadian homes. It says many of the children who were apprehended during the 60s scoop were the offspring of residential school survivors who were not able to effectively care for a child. Intergenerational trauma played a role in the 60s scoop and still plays a role in Indigenous child welfare today. With that said, most of the time children were removed for no other reason than poverty. Okay? This is the main reason that Indigenous children were being taken and given into European homes. It was because of poverty. Okay, it was because of poverty. And we're going to look at some of the numbers. It says prior to 1960, about 1% of children in the care of government child services were indigenous. Okay, so prior to 1960s, there was only 1%. Only 1% of children were in the child care of government, indigenous children. All right. By 1973, that number jumped to 30 to 40%, despite indigenous children making up only 4% of the general population. Could you imagine that? You imagine that? And you got some dumbass in the chat saying, you know, trying to take the focus off of some of this information that's being brought out. Do you understand how diabolical that is? You have 1% of children in the care of government, indigenous children. And in the 1970s, even though indigenous people only make up 4% of the entire Canadian population, 40% of the children in the foster care system are indigenous. Black, Hispanic, and indigenous children, you are not safe inside of North and South Central America. You are not safe. It says from 1965 to 1981, the number of indigenous children transferred into the care of non-indigenous families increased by 250%. So you thought it might have just stopped in the 1960s. It did not. It kept on rising. 250% it increased. It says indigenous children, let me jump off of it. It says between 1960 and 1980, the Indian Affairs Department reports 11,000 indigenous children were adopted. But due to privacy laws around adoption, that number is likely much higher. So now, in the 1980s, right, you have over 11,000 indigenous children inside of the foster care system. And these are numbers that are reported, and it's saying that it's likely so much higher because of privacy laws. Meaning we don't want to tell the public where these children are. So we can't get a full number on how many children truly went into the foster care system. It says about 70% of those children were adopted into non-indigenous families. Furthermore, Métis people were not even recognized as distinct people until 2016. 2016, if you were Métis inside of Canada, you may have just been recognized as being European. So even though indigenous people make up 4% of the entire population inside of Canada, that number rises and rises amongst how many of us make up the foster care system. We jump down a bit. It says the proportion of indigenous children in care has not changed drastically since that time. According to a census done in 2016, 7.7% of children in Canada are Indigenous, yet 52% of children in care are Indigenous. As of 2016, apparently over half of Indigenous parents are incapable of taking care of their children. Unsuitable parents for their children. Imagine that. And it's the same thing with the prison system. That's another similar statistic. I think Indigenous women inside of Canada make up like 90% of the prison system. Yet they only account for like 2-3% of the entire population inside of Canada. There's Deuteronomy 20:32. It says, "Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people." It's exactly what happens to us. Our children are given unto another people. Statistics saying that there's damn near around 70% of all foster care children are Indigenous inside of Canada. And you know what that other 30% is? 25%? Black and Hispanic. Blacks, Hispanics, and Indigenous make up damn near 95% of all children inside of foster care inside of Canada. It's a very sad thing happening to our people right now. Let me drop that. Let's see what else we got. I'll let that other video finish out.
Many of these adoptions didn't work out. One study found that 1/5 of Indigenous adoptions had broken down by the time a child turned 15, half of them by the time they were 17. But it wasn't until the 1980s that the government really started to examine the damage the 60 Scoop caused families and communities. In an influential 1985 report, a Manitoba judge said cultural genocide has taken place in a systematic, routine manner.
Edwin Kimmelman says a cultural genocide has taken place. Cultural genocide. Our oppressor is the absolute devil that the Bible speaks of. They slaughtered over, 99 million African Americans, over 77 million Indigenous people. They have committed a mass genocide. Genocide is almost an extinction of an entire race of people. Tell me that they're not the devil that the Bible speaks of. Book of Corinthians says that man of sin must be revealed. That man of sin must be revealed, and he's being revealed. Because there is no other race of people that have gone around this earth unaliving that many people. Gone around stealing that many children, that many babies. All the biological warfare that they've used to put the Indigenous people almost to a point of extinction. They are the absolute devil that the Bible speaks of. This was a cultural genocide that has taken place.
More than half a century after the 60 scoop began, the trauma and harm are still affecting families. Many survivors say they were abused while in care. They continue to struggle with trauma and loss of family and identity, loss of language and culture, loss of history, similar to residential school survivors. And they don't always have information about where they came from. Some survivors are struggling to find their biological families.
What's the book of Jeremiah say? Prophet Jeremiah said that they heal the hurt of my daughter slightly, just a little bit, by saying peace, peace when there is no peace. What did the province of Manitoba say? The province of Manitoba apologized for its role in the 60s scoop. They're acknowledging how much of a devil they truly are. But what does an apology do for a person that has lost their child, lost their loved one? Apology doesn't do shit. An apology isn't justice. In 2017, an Ontario judge ruled the federal government didn't do enough to protect the cultural identity of children adopted during the 60s scoop. What does acknowledging that you did nothing to protect these children do for Blacks, Hispanics, and Indigenous? Acknowledging your crimes doesn't do anything.
The government has agreed to compensate survivors, but that doesn't include everyone who was affected. And while the era of the 60s scoop is long over, the removal of Indigenous children continues. Today, more than half of the kids in care in Canada are Indigenous.
More than half the children inside of care today are Indigenous. Even though we make up 7% of the total population. What's it say in the book of Lamentations? They hunt our steps. Book of Psalms, they what's it say? Something like a lion. They lurk like a lion. I'm paraphrasing. A lion, they just, they get down and they hide themselves in the bush and they wait for the right time to pounce. They prey on the children of Israel. It says in the book of Ezekiel, all the beasts of the field prey on the children of Israel. We're a hunted race of people inside of Canada, inside of America, inside of the Caribbean islands. From a race of people that absolutely hate us. Let's drop that, because again, and they say this is a statistics today. They say over You know, and I can't remember the statistic of blacks in Canada. I think it's like 25% we make up of the foster care inside of Canada. So blacks and indigenous, even though we make up like 10% of the entire population of Canada, all of our babies are inside of foster care. And in 2025, you would love to believe that that's the end of it. You would love to believe that the Canada just stood down and said, you know, what do they love to say? These are the things of the past. This is what our ancestors did. This isn't what we do today. We love blacks, Hispanics, and indigenous today. These things that were done to your people, those were my ancestors. I didn't do it.
It's excruciating to watch. It's excruciating to watch. It's excruciating to watch. It's excruciating to watch. A mother sobbing as police officers apprehend her newborn baby girl in hospital. Live streamed on Facebook 1 year ago by... It's excruciating to watch. A mother sobbing as police officers apprehend her newborn baby girl in hospital. Live streamed on Facebook 1 year ago by family members. Apprehensions like this happen almost every day in Manitoba. Almost every day in Manitoba. Apprehensions like this happen almost every day in Manitoba. Apprehensions like this happen almost every day in Manitoba, often following something called a birth alert, a notice placed on the mom's medical chart to protect babies considered at risk.
They were originally put in place to increase the safety of children. We found no evidence that that was taking place.
About 11,000 children are in care in Manitoba. An estimated 90% of them are Indigenous. 11,000 children are in care in Manitoba. An estimated 90% of them are Indigenous.
Oh, I thought that was in the past, Canada. Every day, children are being taken from their parents inside of the province of Manitoba. Every single day. And they have something called a birth alert. And what is a birth alert? A birth alert is something that alerts the authorities that an Indigenous woman is pregnant and about to give birth. What do Europeans love to say? Oh, we're all equal. What is it? We all go through the same struggle. Who's this in the chat? Ali Cat says, "Oh, please." I didn't make this statistic up. Out of the 11,000 children that were being taken from these birth alerts, over 90% of them were Indigenous. I see the trolls are out today. Who is this? Alley Cat says, "Oh please, oh please." Let's look up the population of inside of Manitoba. It says approximately 18% of the population in Manitoba identifies as being indigenous. 18% sounds like a very small number, Alley Cat. %18 of the entire population of Manitoba identifies as being indigenous. And Manitoba is a place that has a large population of indigenous people inside of Canada.
At risk.
They were originally put in place to increase the safety of children. We found no evidence that was taking place.
About 11,000 children are in care in Manitoba. An estimated 90% of them are Indigenous.
Damn. 11,000 babies are in care inside of Manitoba, and damn near all of them are indigenous.
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls recommended doing away with birth alerts. First Nations leaders have offered Indigenous women and girls, and the Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls recommended doing away with birth alerts. First Nations leaders are Indigenous. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls recommended doing away with birth alerts. First Nations leaders have also been demanding it for years.
We have grandmothers and aunties that are willing to step in, but that has not been allowed. But now I think with the end of these birth alerts, I think the community and the families can stand a better chance of keeping the child in their family.
I'm hopeful.
And isn't that you would think like a normal thing for an aunt or an uncle? How many of us, Black, Hispanic, or Indigenous, were raised by our grandparents, raised by our grandmother? Telling me somebody in the family couldn't care for the child? Somebody who actually loves the child, who actually cares about the child? Aunt, uncle, and auntie, a cousin. No, the Canadian government, they believe that they're the best parent for the baby.
That it's not going to be just replaced with another way to flag concerns with a mother.
2 months after this video went viral, child welfare authorities transferred custody of the baby girl to her great aunt, exactly what her mother had planned from the beginning.
And it's funny, after a video goes viral, after the disgusting nature of our oppressor is brought to light, oh, now the child can go with their auntie. Now that everybody can see what we're doing, see what we've been doing since the 1800s, up until 2025, Oh, let's put the child with their auntie.
That's just inhumane to do that to her, to do that to myself, to do that to my family. With these birth alerts ending, that's a positive step, but I just really hope there's no tricks up their sleeves.
She hopes her experience means no more moms will have to go through the pain she went through.
It was interesting. I just saw a story. It wasn't too long ago. It was in Burlington. See if I can pull it up real quick. Yeah, we got it right here. In 2 seconds to find. Because, it's crazy. You almost want to think that the foster care parents are going to take care of these children. This was this is something that I don't know if they've settled this case yet or not. There's an article from CBC. It says 2 women charged with first-degree murder in death of 12-year-old boy in Burlington, Ontario. You had 2 women charged with first-degree murder in death of 12-year-old boy. There's that LGBTQ community. The European household is so much better than the indigenous household. Canadian government takes your child. As soon as you go into labor, a alert is sent to the police. Police officers come and take your children, put your child in the care of foster care parents. And here's a story of what takes place. 2 women charged with first-degree murder and death of 12-year-old boy in Burlington, Ontario in 2022. They also face charges laid in 2023 in relation to Indigenous boy's younger sibling. 2 women have been charged with first-degree murder in the death of a boy in Burlington, Ontario in 2022. This LGBTQ family, foster parents, such upstanding citizens. Canadian government comes and takes your baby, gives them to 2 lesbians. This Indigenous boy was murdered by the hands of the alphabet community. In a news release, police said a 44-year-old woman from Burlington and a 42-year-old from Hamilton, the prospective adoptive parents of the 12-year-old, were arrested on Thursday. After the police found the boy's body, the Child Abuse and Sexual Assault Unit began an investigation. The 2 accused, who have also been charged with failure to provide the necessities of life, were in custody pending a bail hearing Friday. I mean, I don't know what else I have to say. Good night. These prospective parents are so much better than the Indigenous parents. You understand how many women and children have gone missing inside of North and South Central America. Go into foster care, go into the child welfare system, and they never find their way home. I'll read that verse one more time. It says, verse 32 says, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand. You saw that sister lying on the hospital bed, just gave birth to her child. There is no might in her hand to do anything. The police come and just take the child out of your hands. You would think maybe some kind of fucking decency to maybe let the child be with the parent for the night. Maybe be with the child for a couple of days. If this woman is such a danger to her child, maybe help the woman. Maybe stay there with her and just let her hold her fucking child for a little bit. For a few days. Child's been growing inside of her for 9 months. It's been attached to her, been a part of her, been feeding off her for 9 months. Jump to the book of let's share my screen. We jump to the book of Malachi. Malachi chapter 1 and verse 4. And it says, whereas Edom saith, who is Edom? Edom is the biblical name for the European. The biblical name for the Russians, the Germans, the British, the Europeans, the Caucasian man. That's who he is in the Bible. That's where he descends from. Whereas Edom saith, we are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts. They shall build, but I will throw down. Because this is going to be justice from the Lord. This will be justice from the Most High. For all the wicked things that they've done in this earth. It says, they shall build, but I will throw down. And they shall call them the border of wickedness. And what is a border? A border is where two things meet. You see where, say, Niagara Falls and Buffalo, New York meet. That is a border. The Lord said that Edom is the border of wickedness. Meaning when you cross that line, when you cross that border and you enter into his city, you enter into his country, you have entered into the place of wickedness. A place where you give, the minute you give birth, the police take your children from you. A place where the Canadian government takes your children and puts them in residential schools. A place where you go and the government advertises your child to European families to be taken in foster care children. That place is a border of wickedness. And the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. You want to know something beautiful about being Black, Hispanic, or Indigenous? God loves you. The Lord loves you. The Most High loves you. But if you're a descendant of Esau, the Lord hath indignation for you forever. Why? Because the European man is the devil that the Bible speaks of. And only a devil would be capable of doing the things that he is doing to this day to Blacks, Hispanics, and Indigenous people. All right? So with that, make sure you like, share, subscribe. Okay, like the channel or like the class. All right. Thank you to the trolls in the chat for helping the algorithm. There's only more people that are going to come and see what Europeans have done to Blacks, Indigenous, and Hispanic people. I appreciate y'all for being in the chat. Like, share, subscribe. And with that, I say shalom, Yahbashim Shabakatham to the brothers. Yahweh Shamar, Al-Thab, Bashim Yahshai to the sisters. All right. Again, make sure you tune in tomorrow night. All right. Tuesday night class. We got scripture breakdown. Don't miss it, 7 p.m. Shalom, Israel.